Hey guys, today I'm interviewing the lead A&Rs from Monstercat Recordings, Jonathan Winter and Jimmy Yoshitake. We will go into how you can get signed to some of the world's biggest and best dance music labels like Monstercat, what A&Rs are listening out for in music, what they're looking for in terms of personality when it comes to working with artists, the benefits of releasing on a label, and also what to watch out for and some mistakes to avoid if you don't want to end up just annoying them. So if your demos aren't currently being listened to or you're not hearing back from labels such as Monstercat, this interview will really help. Now before we get stuck in, I want to say a huge shout out to my Accelerator students. We're getting released on labels such as Monstercat each and every week, and if you want more details on how to get your music sounding professional as quickly as possible, you can check out the details below this video. So without further ado, let's meet Jon and Jimmy, and I hope you enjoy this interview as much as I did. Here's Jon Winter. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your history in the music industry and how you came to be a lead A&R at Monstercat?
Yeah, so I was fortunate enough to meet the founders of Monstercat a couple of years beforehand, and grew this relationship with them and ended up being a part of the launch of the label. So I've been here the whole time through ups and downs, doing many different roles, but at the moment I am one of the lead A&Rs for Uncaged, which is our heavier club kind of focused label out of the three. I'm also working really closely with Chelsea, who's not here at the moment, but she's a big part of the Uncaged curation as well. And we've got Jimmy here as well for Instinct.
I'm Jimmy. I joined Monstercat a little under 2 years ago. I started off in the music industry working at Dim Mak Records, which is Steve Aoki's label. I worked there for about 6 years, starting off as an intern in the streaming services department, moved into the shared position of A&R and streaming services about 2 years into it, and then kind of just worked my way up there before joining the Monstercat team as a lead A&R. I'm based in Los Angeles. Been here my whole life, and yes, the beginning era of the dance music explosion, and it's been really cool seeing it really expand specifically here in Los Angeles.
The first and most basic question is, what would you describe is it that A&Rs do?
I say that we're the person who's bringing forward the music to the label, either from artists or the demo box or management. And we're like the first point of contact when it comes to releasing music on a label.
Kind of introducing, whatever teams, artists themselves or their management teams, kind of like the different things that the Monstercat ecosystem, what we typically like to do, and different deal points, marketing activations, things like that. Yeah, it's kind of like the main point person to the artists and their teams.
And the term artist and repertoire, is that just describing you managing what comes through the label creatively and musically?
Musically, creatively, different artists that we'd want to work with, kind of creating an idea or plan for what we want, to be supporting and releasing, and kind of tailoring the different releases to fit that sound, whether it's, coming up with different lists of artists we want to work with, artists whom we've worked with previously that we want to continue working with, and then just going through the different platforms of either email or the demo box to find new artists as well to work with that maybe we're not too aware of.
Okay, so I've got a bunch of questions that my community wanted me to ask you, but sure. I'm sure like now and again something will spark me off in a direction. So you mentioned then that sometimes you kind of look for artists. Does that mean you're not just fielding applicants coming through your website or email? You're actually actively hunting for fresh artists?
For sure. We're always listening to what's out there, going to shows, seeing what other people are playing out, checking Spotify and all the other places for new releases, seeing what's out there.
Cool. Yeah, going to shows really helps, because you could kind of like, while we're listening to the thousands of different demos each year, it's like, okay, can we visualize ourselves enjoying this style of music or type of song, or this type of artist, what they're playing out? Can we visualize ourselves at these different places while we're listening to the demo? So that definitely helps. Yeah, and kind of like, it's all case by case. I think, demos come through any all different types of places. So yeah, we always keep our doors open to, we never want to block ourselves off to anything that could possibly be the next thing or something that really amplifies our catalog
Okay,
as a
great.
whole.
And what would you say? And I guess this is a bit of a loaded question because it's, making the presumption that you are, which I know you are because your labels are great. But what would you say defines a good A&R versus a bad A&R?
Yeah, that's a difficult one, but I would say that a good A&R when working with artists that you've already released with is somebody who is very open to different ideas from the artist, but also the artist has that relationship with them that they're able to take some feedback and build, you have that trust essentially. So you're part of the team and it feels like you're working together, not the artist is trying to impress the A&R and it's like that weird dynamic. I think that's, one good thing about being a good A&R.
Yeah.
But also a good A&R can be brutally honest with feedback and be that one person on their team that will tell them like, oh, you need to fix this or that, but do it in a way where it's clear and they're not trying to guess what you mean when you're saying, something is too loud in the mix or whatever. You need to know what you're talking about. Otherwise, the artist is going to spend way too much time trying to figure out what you mean.
Yeah. I was just going to say that dovetails nicely into the next question. What do A&Rs look for in a perfect artist? But please finish what you were going to say.
Yeah, feel free to add on.
Just wanted to add on, from my experience personally, I feel like communication with the artist and their team, that's very crucial. And that's a big determinant of what's a good or bad versus bad A&R. Yeah, just communication, being able to, like Jon mentioned, being able to have constructive criticism when it needs it and really, showing excitement when it calls for it, because that's the best thing an artist can receive is someone being really motivated and excited about the songs that they're making. And transparency is very important, and being able to give your opinions, update them on different things that are happening with their records before and after the release. And mainly if you're able to give attention to the artist, I think that's what really makes a good A&R is giving those artists that you've connected with, you're talking about wanting to release music together, but just giving them that attention, especially if you're already working on a project with them and you've committed to songs. Once you commit to the songs, they want dates and different things like that. So just giving them that attention that is deserved from the artists that we're working with, because it really sucks, or a bad A&R, say if you're even in like a studio meeting with them and they're playing you their demos, you want to give them your full attention and give them feedback when necessary. You don't want to just kind of like be on your phone and not paying attention at all. That's really disrespectful, and it could really, turn off an artist to wanting to be creative, and you definitely want to avoid that.
Yeah.
Most of the stories I hear about bad experiences with a label, I'm not sure if this is necessarily the A&R's responsibility, but when they don't have good communication with the A&R, then they're at kind of a standstill where they've signed a release and they're not getting updates from anybody coming up to their release date. They don't have the artwork, or they don't have the marketing plan or whatever. And if you have a good A&R that has the communication, they can make sure that you're all set, even if it's not their sole responsibility to handle all of these things. The communication, I think, is the most important thing. And it's where I've heard people just have a lot of bad experiences when they can't get a hold of at least somebody on the team. And that's, I think, where A&Rs are kind of your, I wouldn't say your last resort, but in a case where you can't get the answers you need from the proper people on the team, it's good to have the A&R there to support the artist and make sure everything's going well.
Yeah.
Right. And building off of that, sorry, it's like also communication internally with our own teams that we're working with, any A&Rs, whatever different teams that we have behind us, whether it's design, marketing, or PR, anything within the label. We want to be able, a good A&R is able to communicate artist desires or kind of help follow up and with both sides, and making sure, like Jon said, everything's running smoothly for their release.
Yeah, I have had emails, worried emails from students now and again who have got a release signed to a label, and the release date's coming up and they haven't heard anything. for weeks and they're freaking out and it's not good. That takes me on to the next question, which is, what do you guys look for in the perfect artist? The perfect artist. Aside from, say, well, no, okay, including the kind of music that they might bring to you, are there any attributes that you think, yeah, we want to work with this guy, or yeah, we want to work with this girl?
I could go first on that one. I think, based on my experience, of course, I think consistency is the best. When you have an artist who's consistent and delivering, demos, meeting their deadlines, wanting to be creative and open to different ideas that crazy labels, A&Rs might have for their records, or different opportunities for them with other artists we're working with. Just being able to be open and having a conversation, I think that's like the perfect artist, where they're really flexible, they communicate back to us, and yeah, consistency.
Cool.
I would say that that is the main thing I was going to point out, but also it's nice when an artist has, a vision and some goals for their project, and their goal isn't solely just to get signed onto the label, because then it becomes kind of a weird conversation when every time they send you a song, because it's, you're either going to make them really happy or really let them down, or they walk away feeling kind of upset. And it's good when an artist has targets of where they want to release, who they want to work with, what they want to accomplish with their music. But I think it's a lot healthier when things are pitched to you as, you have an opportunity here to work with me on this release, but if not, that's all right. I will continue on and make sure that I find the best home for this, or self-release it and push it as hard as I can on my own, and come back to you with more in the future.
So it's kind of within their goals are within a greater context than just, I want to release with you guys. Because then when they've done that, that's like, well, I've done the goal now. That makes sense.
The reason I say that is because when you sign to a label, you shouldn't expect the label to be handling all of the promo on their end. What a label should do is amplify what you're doing as an artist and what you bring to the table. So if you don't, land that signing to that label, there's other options. You can self-release it or release on another label and just keep pushing forward. Yeah, I think that's kind of where I'm coming from with that one.
Okay, so consistency, communication, and goals over and above just getting signed.
Yep.
Cool. And this is something that I get asked a lot when the question of getting signed comes up, which is, how big of a factor is having existing personal relationships with someone connected to the label? Because I think a lot of people labor under the misapprehension that you have to know someone in the industry, but I haven't found that has to be the case. I personally have found it helps, but the music generally speaks for itself. So from your perspective and your label, how important is that?
I think, like you mentioned, it is definitely helpful. Say if like we work with artists or managers that we trust who are always bringing on different acts, it's very helpful when those same managers hit us up with their different artists that they'd like us to consider. That makes it easier on our team because we worked with them and they kind of know what we do. So there's no real surprises on either end. But it's definitely never a necessity or a must-have. Like you said, the music, I feel, can speak for itself. And building off what Jon said previously, if they have a goal in mind that they want to accomplish, that's everything, because you don't really need to know anyone to really accomplish all these different goals you want done with your music or you envision. You kind of just have to execute to the best of your ability. And there's really nothing that can change that or make that better or worse for you.
It definitely doesn't hurt if one of our artists knows the other artist and can vouch for them, saying like they've been grinding for years and they put on a really good show, and all these things that maybe we can't see right away because we don't know them that well. But I would definitely say it's not required.
Okay, great.
But it's good to be connected and have that support system of other artists that have your back as well.
Now we've looked at what makes a perfect artist, what makes a good A&R. I would then ask, from your last answer, how can people start making these connections? over and above just grinding and making music and getting better and better, what's a good way for people to start making these connections?
I think just connecting as much as possible with your peers, the different artists that you want to work with, or you want to play your music live, or you want to support later on, or someone that or artists that you're just big fans of or in love with what they're doing, or maybe you follow their social media and their values align with you. So I think that's what would definitely help, is just connecting with as many people as possible, so like Jon said, they can vouch for you when the time comes. It's a lot smaller of a community than I think people think. It's very tight knit, especially within like the labels and the different people, the promoters and things like that, different managers. It's a smaller community. So as long as you put in that work and you're putting an effort to communicate with or to connect with others, then you'll find your spot. You'll have people reaching out wanting to work with you.
I think if you asked me this question 3 years ago, my answer would be completely different from what it is today. I think in the recent years, the growth of Discord communities and Twitch streams, YouTube streams has been insanely growing. And there's so many opportunities to join these artist communities where they do feedback streams and have a community of really talented artists. And, there have been a number of demos that come through from our artists doing a feedback stream and just saying, like, this one track blew me away. You should give it a listen. And they didn't have to do that. They didn't have to forward it over, but they felt the need because they had that moment with that artist, showing them something that they didn't expect to receive that day. And I think that's a very unique way for a label to receive a demo, is from another artist who did a feedback session.
I think that could be an absolute nugget of gold for viewers, because you're right, this is something that's only come about in the last couple of years. But that's great. Yeah, I think people will really enjoy, because a lot of my students are going on these feedback streams from artists. And, actually one of the several times when I've had a connection that's been beneficial or advantageous, it was going to conferences when they had demo drops, which is kind of like the old school equivalent. And then the artist like, yeah, that's really good. Let's do something. So that's really cool to hear. And before getting signed to a label such as Monstercat, how important is it to have a portfolio of work or a prior history, as it were?
It definitely helps, having to tap into different fan bases that we can help amplify their songs within these different communities for. But it's definitely not a must-have, similar to the connections question. If the music can absolutely speak for itself, if it's a brand new project and it has the bones and the direction that we're looking for and hear promise in, then we'll do it. Yeah, there's no real like you must have one song on Defected, or you must have one Deadbeats or a failure release before we could consider you. That would just if anything, we kind of want to be the first to find these artists, right?
Yeah, I'd say in terms of portfolio, you don't need to have necessarily anything public. I think it helps if you've had that experience of releasing music and receiving criticism in the comment sections, because that can be kind of rough. And as soon as you release on a bigger label, that's going to be multiplied like crazy. You're going to start getting a lot more people talking about your music and letting you know what they think about it. And I think it's important for an artist to be ready, and at least definitely having a bunch of tracks ready to sign before releasing the first one. Because what I've noticed is, with artists that aren't used to that audience listening to their music, it can become a little overwhelming. And if you just release the one song, you can kind of get hung up on, oh, this next one has to be even better. And you spend just so much time going at it. But if you sign multiple records, you're kind of forced to just keep going, and you have those tracks locked in and you can focus on the next one. I think it helps alleviate some of that stress.
Yeah, like
a little bit.
The cherry, your first release. Take that criticism. Okay, cool. So you have signed people from their first release. It does happen then.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, more so in the early days of the label. Nowadays, we are a bit more aware of the benefits of working with artists who have at least some form of community or fan base behind their project, because we kind of treat the label as a catalyst to amplify. We see what works already and kind of target the right audience for them and kind of help them blow up in their niche that they're catering to with their music. Yeah, it definitely helps.
Yeah, that makes sense. Great. And what balance of originality versus fitting into the sound? I know you've got your splinter labels now releasing the different styles, but well, it's not obvious actually. I'm being presumptuous, but I assume that you want music to be able to fit into the current sound to a degree, but you also want people to push things forwards and sound fresh rather than doing something that's going to alienate everyone because no one can understand these crazy beats. So is there a particular ratio you kind of listen out for, or is it just more holistic than that?
I think it definitely a case by case thing. Originality is, I think, is absolutely very key. It doesn't need to be, I mean, there's different layers to a song, right? There's different groups of drums that you can have your own original sound for, or a specific synth, or the way that you play the synth, the specific melodies that you use, counter melodies as well. So I think it's definitely important 100% to have a shade of originality, but there is a level of fitting in when it comes to maybe quality or tempo or arrangement that you want, the listener and other peers of yourselves that want to go and play the song live. You want to make sure it kind of fits arrangement wise to something that they could even have the opportunity to play. So yeah, it's definitely great to fit in those cases, but shade of originality, whether it's in one of those different categories of instruments or percussion, I think that, or groove even, I think that's very important as well. So people can hear it and be like, oh, that's X artist, when they're just out and about or hearing it randomly played on their Spotify or SoundCloud.
I think originality is very subjective. And the main thing is that you don't want to sign an artist that sounds exactly like somebody else. But in a way, most music is a remix of a combination of a lot of different inspirations. So there definitely has to be originality there. But like Jimmy said, if your originality is the structure of your music making no sense, then that's not going to help you.
Right. I'd
But
say
if
like,
you take some risks, then that could be really cool.
There's different ways you could, like Jon mentioned, yeah, everything's a remix of something. So it's all about the original take of how you do it. Is it, you filter or affect a vocal a specific way, or a synth, you play it a certain way, even if it's interpolated from a different song or sampled from a different song, it's the way you use it in an original way. So you can never be fully original where your stuff sounds like nothing like anyone else has done before, because then it'll just be like hard to connect with as a fan. We're fans at the end of the day of this music. So if it's hard to like connect and listen to it and enjoy it, the other songs that we've kind of heard throughout our lives, it makes it tough. I think what we're doing, there is a level of definitely fitting into styles and the way people do things, but never overly original, I would say.
Cool. And how do you recommend that people can separate themselves from other artists, assuming standing out is something that you're looking for, or is it all just within that composition and production itself? Actually, and if so, how might someone stand out from other artists with a similar style? I think you touched upon it in that last answer, actually, Jimmy, in terms of perhaps processing things in different ways.
Yeah, you're right. Kind of like touched on that in the last answer. It's just the way they go about their originality and stand out. Maybe if it's like a tempo or a style that hasn't been used in a long time, and music works in a circle. It's popular at this time period and then kind of dies off, but it always comes back. So maybe catching that right time period where that style is not being done, but it's been out there, it just hasn't been done recently, and then giving a fresh new take on it with influences that are popping off right now. Kind of like a Fred again, or style of an artist where it's very unique for our time. It's not just the same stuff over and over again. He adds a different flair, even within the marketing that he does. It's very personable. Yeah, just standing out in ways that everyone's not doing the same thing that you're doing, but taking influences from the past.
Anything to add to that, Jon?
My take on this is a little bit different, actually. I've seen artists that have a very similar sound to other artists and thought to myself as an A&R, this could be a problem. What if they get called out for sounding too much like this artist? And There's a couple people who will say, oh, it sounds like this, sounds like that. It's pretty much in every comment section. But surprisingly enough, I've seen also cases of that artist becoming really close with the artist that they sound similar to as they progress down their journey of figuring out what their sound is and adjusting a little bit to sound more unique to them. Whether it's like switching up their leads or the way that they process their vocals or whatever. I think it can be looked at in a very negative way at first, oh, you sound just like this guy. But it can actually work out in the end too. In the very beginning, it's important to not really focus on being the most unique, because if you are combining all these genres that don't make sense together or hasn't been done before, what are you going to reference when you're trying to figure out your final mix? So I would say in the early days of producing and being an artist, it's okay to copy a little bit, obviously not straight up rip another person's song, but it's good practice to try to mimic what you like, but then make sure that you flip it into something more original before you put it out.
I'm so glad you say that, because that's exactly what I teach my students. Something that I've noticed with new students is that they really want to be original straight away before they've got the production bones under their belt to do that. I kind of liken it like going into a karate dojo and saying, I want to design a new martial art. You can't.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? You need to learn what the rules are, how it works, how you can get a really good sound, and then naturally start adding your own flair.
That practice. Yeah, you don't have to release these songs that you're trying to quote unquote copy. You don't have to release them, but it's very important to just learn. It's so tedious, production is. So you really need to be able to have, like Jon said, a reference to try to match, because then you can learn the different steps to making music and the access of using a preset. You don't want to create everything from scratch, especially if you're just beginning to produce, because it's a very difficult thing to sound design and come to a sound that's really high quality. You might get hung up on it and drop music altogether, but it's definitely encouraged to use these different presets. There's sounds that are there and made already for you to kind of just like figure out the basics of putting everything together.
Excellent. Yeah, I kind of liken it to producers being a chef. You don't need to grow the wheat to make the bread to, you know what I mean? It's at some point you've got to take some ingredients and make a nice dish.
Absolutely.
Well, naturally, over time, once you get more and more comfortable with production, you're going to venture down different paths of synthesizing your own drums or using hardware synths or, doing your own vocals. But I think in the beginning, it's really important to just focus on finishing music. Knowing that you can finish a song is motivation that you need to keep going. And if you try to do everything from scratch, you're not going to be finishing records.
And I just thought of an example. Say the general listener out there, the fan of dance music, they're not really going to make that connection as much either, right? They're just going to listen to the song and enjoy it. I love watching shows. I love the different cinematography used, but there's different things, maybe like a specific transition to a different scene or a sound effect, that stream sound effect that's used in like every movie. That's not really original, right? But it's something that fits and the casual viewer won't even think about. So they're just enjoying the art as a whole. So yeah, you definitely don't want to get hung up on things that people outside of the production community are going to recognize, right? That also, I feel like helps.
No one in the club's ever gone, that's Kashmir Loop 375.
There's probably some. There's probably some.
But... Yeah. Cool. And if someone wants to produce full-time for a living and has 3 hours a day, maybe they're studying, maybe they've got a job, should they try and build a social media following, or should they spend all the hours they possibly can improving their music and production skills?
I would say for the first year at least, focus on the music production, because it takes a long time to get that on lock and feel comfortable releasing your music to the public. It takes a lot of hours. And so if you're only having 3 hours a day, it's probably best to use that watching tutorials, working on music, doing little bootlegs for fun, just basically practicing that. Because with social media, a lot of the growth is kind of unexpected. It happens organically in a way that you put out something, it connects They share it with somebody, the algorithm pops off, and suddenly you've got thousands of views on something. But if you're putting out music that you don't think is good enough, or content that's not good enough, actually, I guess it's not all about the music nowadays either. You can do all sorts of things on social media. So maybe if your content isn't necessarily your music, then you can build presence still in that space of that genre or that style of music, just doing other things, and maybe. But I think focusing on your music is really important, like your music production early on. Otherwise, you're going to put all this effort into pushing something that nobody wants.
Yeah, you might not have anything even ready to present to the world. Yeah, it's definitely good to, like Jon mentioned, if you're giving lessons or there's a special way you like breaking down a track for people to view and learn from or things like that. I think it's good to have a presence and consistency if you're ready for that. But if you only have 3 hours a day, I would say definitely focus on the music first. And then once it reaches a level of quality where others are noticing and you're finding different positive comments from a lot of different people, then you'll be ready to strategize social media. Everything's changing all the time too. So, and also music, this thing could be a marathon, it's not a sprint. Sometimes you could maybe have a hit record when you're 40, and that's when your like big money making career start. It's always the music at the end of the day, and connecting with others that'll be the most beneficial in the long run. So if you're kind of just in your own bubble trying to practice social media and there's only those 3 hours a day you have, then you might be wasting time a little bit.
Okay, cool. Great advice. And do you guys at Monstercat prefer to work with someone short term, or do you prefer longer term relationships where you might work with an artist for a longer time? And what kind of time periods are we looking at here?
Definitely long term. We have a bunch of artists that we worked with for almost 10 years now. Some of those artists have been consistent across those 10 years. Sometimes they've one-off worked with other labels or worked with other labels simultaneously. But it is a really good feeling as an A&R to see an artist grow and be a part of their career early on and continue that relationship. But at the same time, the way that we've built Monstercat is different than a lot of other labels, especially when we started out. Things were way different in 2011. We never signed an artist to a long-term deal. It was just track by track, preferred that you had multiple tracks. Right now, I think our goal at minimum is to lock in 3 from a new artist before they make their debut, just so that we have a story to tell, a consistent release flow. We don't lock the artist down. So if they feel like they want to move on to another label or self-release or do whatever, they are free to do so. And if they send something that we're not super stoked about, we're also not forced to put it out either.
100% agree. Long term is definitely the goal. Like Jon mentioned, we don't have any exclusive deals. So if they're long term roster artists, then that just means we're making each other happy on both sides. So that's always a good, healthy relationship that we'd prefer to have.
So it's
Yeah.
long term by choice, rather than being locked into contracts that either one side, it's not working for anymore.
I would say there's one way that we also try to make sure that we're in a good position with an artist to have a long-term relationship. And that is, when we're receiving demos, if we receive 10 demos and we only like one of them, probably not a good idea to sign that one, no matter how much you like that one song. Because if things continue down that path where 1 in every 10 gets signed, I think overall the artist is going to have a bad experience working with you. It's just like rejection after rejection. You want to make sure that there can be a form of consistency, and you're not just going to release one track every, 10, 15 submissions.
That's an interesting point, actually. You touched upon liking if there are perhaps 3 releases that you can do when you're working with an artist. Do you think it's a good idea for people to have a stable of 3 solid tracks ready? So then if they send a track to you and you guys say, yeah, this is good, are you likely to then say, have you got anything else that we can hear?
Oh yeah, that's the most common thing you'll hear from an A&R is, do you have anything else? So if you have one track and you send it over, it's probably not the right time to do that. You should probably at least have some ideas ready. They don't have to be fully mastered, ready to ship out to the DSPs, but good enough idea the A&R can see, okay, they're not just like a one-hit wonder. They've got other tracks that they're wrapping up.
I love
Yeah,
it.
that's a
I
great
so
point.
love it when I interview people and they say what I teach people. That makes my life easier.
And vice versa, you don't want to also send 30 songs for us to check out because that gives you more possibility of us not enjoying, even if it's like 5 songs out of the 30, it's still a pretty low percentage. It's best to, like you said, have like 3 solid records that you feel that you're the happiest with and you feel like you've gotten the best responses from and go from there. Yeah.
Okay, great. And what would you say is the number one trait of your most successful artists? If there is any one trait that you've noticed across them that you could say for sure, this is what it would be.
This is a hard one.
Yeah.
Aside from communication, because I mean, a lot of times artists will have management that handle the communication. I
Mhm.
would just say one thing I've noticed across a lot of the really successful artists is that they don't take things too seriously. And by that, I mean, they care about their music and they put in the hours, they put in the effort, but they're not hung up on the little things. If it means submitting a record that you think is 99% of the way there and just letting it go and working on whatever else you have to do next, I think that is going to help you a lot more than fine tuning every little element of the track over and over again to a point where you might have actually made it worse. And not taking things too seriously also means not really taking the comments that you receive online as well to heart, because everybody's got their own opinion. There's going to be a lot of people who prefer your old sound over your new sound, and there's going to be a lot of people that like your new stuff over your old stuff. You just have to do what's right for you,
Mhm.
and sometimes not really care about every single opinion that's out there. If you get
Yeah.
rejected from a label, that shouldn't make the rest of your day terrible. You should still be able to crack on. I guess that's kind of where my head's at with this one.
And I think confidence is also very important on my side. I think it helps move all these different things along, whether it's the communication or switching of styles. Like John was saying, like if you have confidence in that and the music's great and you've had great feedback from the people that it matters from, I think that'll go a long ways for sure.
Okay, great. As I found out with YouTube and with production as well, but now the YouTube channel's doing well, the bigger you are exposed to more people, you will get haters and you will have people who aren't necessarily haters, they just don't like what you do. And you kind
Hmm.
of have to be okay with that and just crack on regardless.
Hmm.
Otherwise, you'll never do anything. It's kind of price of entry, if you want to be in the
Yeah.
public sphere.
Kind of worry about what you have going on rather than everyone else's opinions. Because if you get hung up on opinions, you may never leave your room.
That's it, man.
It might be too so detrimental to your health, and you definitely want to have that confidence and have a healthy, positive mind whenever possible.
I agree 100%.
Excellent. I'm mindful of your time, but we've got a few more absolute juicy ones. Does releasing with an established label like yourselves have over self-releasing?
I would say the team that comes along with it. We've really put some time into curating a great workforce of employees that know and love the music. And it's great to have worked with a label that doesn't say if you self-release and you're with a distributor, they might have 1,000 different projects that they're helping pitch, or they might not even offer pitching services to get your music heard and prioritized for listens and support throughout the industry. So I think that's definitely a benefit is having the help and support from others that are invested into you and your art. I think it's important to have them on your side as well rather than putting it out yourself. But I mean, you're fine going that route if you have everything dialed in, but it's nice to have the support of others invested into your work.
I would say that labels provide an audience for you. They also have other opportunities like events or gaming partnerships, sync stuff like that. A lot of things that may not be within reach. Jimmy mentioned pitching. I think distribution is something that a lot of people have access to nowadays, but I think there are a bunch of stores that we distribute to in certain like APAC regions, for example, that you may not be hitting when you release through another aggregator. So, there's a bunch of different things, but mainly we're here to be a team and amplify what you're doing So it's not just a hand over your record and we'll take everything you can expect, crazy numbers, anything like that. It's basically just like a marketing team, making sure you get paid and hopefully a really good experience overall with opportunities that you didn't have before.
Great. And one of the biggest questions, what's the best way to get demos heard by Monstercat A&R?
Label Radar. We've got a
Label,
demo
yeah.
box and we go through it every week. Someone on our team goes through them all, presents the best ones to us in our weekly meeting. So, we hear the good stuff and he sorts through all the stuff that isn't quite there yet. So it's great all around. That would be the best way, I would say, just to submit your music. But the best way to get heard, or the most fun way for us, I would say, is when we discover you somehow, whether that's through your Instagram reels, TikToks, YouTube, Twitch stream, whatever it is. If there's any way that we discover your music, maybe an artist is playing it out, that's the most fun for an A&R and the most exciting way to get your music heard, I think.
Okay,
Because
fantastic.
then you'll get reach out from the label and feel even better about
Yeah.
yourself. It's not like you're pitching to the label.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say put in as much hard work as possible to get your music to the highest quality possible. So then not only is the label reaching out, but then a management team could reach out to you wanting to represent you. And then that's also a great way for us to hear your music if there's managers that are helping promote your project to us.
Excellent. And the last question really is whether you've got any other tips over and above what we've spoken about for any artists watching who would want to get signed or released on Monstercat. I know we've gone into a lot already, so just if there's anything you're thinking, oh, we should touch upon that.
I'd say there's a lot of resources out there. There's a lot of success stories that you can look at for ways that artists have become successful over the years. And it can be really easy to look at someone's success and go, okay, so they did this, and then they did that, and then this happened, and I'm going to do that. And then things don't really go as planned. I think it's important to realize that there's not one specific way to become successful, and you can learn or you can take little bits and pieces from different success stories out there. Like if you know an artist that blew up because they made bootleg remixes, that may have been something that was a bit easier to do in the past when your stuff wouldn't get taken down off SoundCloud the instant you upload it. But there's still ways that you can make that work. But you gotta factor in, okay, now there's new platforms. There's TikTok out there. So should I be on there? And you can learn from artists that are doing TikTok in a way that doesn't compromise their artist vision. I've heard a couple of artists talk about TikTok in a way it's like, oh, I don't want to be doing dances. Like, have you looked at TikTok? There's so many different avenues where you can make content. It can be a quick remix video like Crank does, for example, or it could be reaction videos where you're, listening to a track and saying if it's a banger or not, or making mashups that shouldn't work, but they do. There's so many different things that you can do out there. And I think it's just important to figure out what you enjoy, what represents you, and mix it up, see what works.
Right.
Yeah, definitely agree. It's very toxic to be comparing yourselves or looking at the different ways people quote unquote blew up. So you kind of just have to, I think the most important thing is putting your heart and soul into this music that you're creating, and you want other people to enjoy and you enjoy yourself. So make sure that whatever you're presenting has that care put into it, because it really helps show your passion and dedication. And I think it'll really translate into the music, the quality and the memorability of it, if it's a real thing for you, because we're all humans and we all relate to different things, but similar to different things. I think that's definitely most important. But if you want every opportunity out there possible, still do that, but know how to disconnect yourself from it once it's already been done, because there's a lot of different places your music can go, your art can go. Whether it's, someone wants to collaborate on it, or someone really likes the vocal and you wrote the vocal, even if it's really important to you, but someone could help take it, amplify it, and take it to a different place maybe that you couldn't. Yeah, it might be best to sever that tie with it and let it go off into the world. You don't want to be too precious about it. I know it's a little contradicting, putting your heart and soul into something but then detaching from it, but that's kind of sometimes what happens in this creative field.
I think there's some deep wisdom in that, because you have to care about the art, but as we already touched upon, if you're going to get knocked down by the slightest deviation from your vision, then you don't get anywhere. So I think that's fantastic advice.
I know you didn't ask that question, but I did have an answer for what's the biggest difficulties faced being an A&R, and that's time management. Very difficult when you're trying to develop artists and you're also researching new artists and you're taking time to provide feedback and trying to think of ways to market an artist and like pitch ideas to our marketing team. And also, Jimmy mentioned in another answer, getting the rest of the company excited about a signing. It all takes a lot of time. So time management is the trickiest one, especially when you're factoring in going to shows as well during the night. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of fun, I would say. It's a lot of fun. So I can't complain. But there are a lot of nights where you don't get a lot of sleep, especially around ADE.
Yeah, that's a big one.
That's a really good. I'm glad you touched upon that. And I should have asked that. What's the main difficulty for A&Rs? Because then I can ask, with that in mind, is there anything artists can do to be mindful of that in terms of response times? Should they be chasing up? Should they be nudging? What's respectful? What's annoying?
There's only one thing I would say don't do, other than giving us your entire playlist of 20 demos. Obviously, curate that down to your top 3, maybe 5 max. The only other thing I would say don't do is send more demos right after you get rejected. Even if the ones that you sent in were months old and you've been working on this new music for a while, it just comes off as being rushed. And also, we're out here trying to get our inbox to 0. And if we put in the time to respond to one of your emails, and as soon as we hit send, there's 3 more demos to listen to, I don't know. Is that a bad thing to say, Jimmy?
No, I completely agree. You don't want to keep pressing and pressing and pressing if it's, just not the right fit at the moment, or maybe the quality of your work. Maybe you have a specific filter on where you hear it a certain way, but bring it to fresh ears of an 8-person A&R team that we have. And if we're not super into it and we let you know, it's like sending 5 more similar songs. I don't think it'll work out as well. So yeah, really hone in on, I think getting outsiders' opinions is probably good too. And you wouldn't send a playlist of 30 unreleased songs to someone. You kind of want to, also curating those 5 songs to send. I think that's very important, because you need to be excited about them. If there's 20 songs and maybe we pick 2 that we really feel strongly about, and then we end up putting it out, we don't want to hear, oh, well, I didn't even like those songs, you guys really wanted them. It's like, well, that, we want to release the best work possible that you also feel confident on, so we can all put our best foot forward on it. I think it's definitely best to do that. Definitely hold off on sending demos right after we politely pass.
Wait at least a couple weeks, I would say. It doesn't have to be much longer than that, but if it's instantly same day that you got other songs turned down, that's definitely not a good look. There's one other thing too. If you're submitting demos and you feel the need to explain this part is really rough, or this needs to be redone, or this isn't, mixed and mastered, might not be the right time to send the demo. Put in the work, just be mindful of the time. Obviously, things are different when you've already worked with the label and they're like pressing you for new music. They want to know what you've been working on. Then you can send over something that you made yesterday afternoon. You'll build up that relationship where you can send over half-baked ideas. But in the beginning, when you're making your first impression, you definitely want to have something that's more polished.
You don't want to sound too desperate.
That's great advice. So I'm glad we've kind of got round to this, because I think that's going to be very valuable information for me as well, as someone who does give feedback on music and is again in that constant trying to get inbox down to 0, which is never ever going to happen. If you get an email straight back within 5 minutes, it's like, oh, I thought I'd be able to finish work on time today.
Yeah, well, what happens is you end up kind of skipping over it because you're like, oh, I just replied to this person and I need to get back to all these other people. And then they end up waiting longer. So I feel like it's in both parties' interest to give a bit of space and come back a couple of weeks later.
Yeah. And if we're a little slow because there's so much piled up, I think one follow-up is nice. And I think there's not going to bat an eye at one follow-up. But if you're like, 3, 4 follow-ups deep, I think then that just doesn't help anything. And also because say if we sort our inbox by date they came in and by unread, if we work from the bottom of the list, the more you follow up, it bumps you back up to the top. So it might even delay the response time, the follow-up.
I don't know why we're talking so much actually about email. I think that's my fault for doing that, because I definitely prefer that people go about submitting the proper way through Label Radar. I do get a ton of random reach outs and I try to listen to each of them, but I don't have time to reply to all of them. I just want to make sure that I'm not missing anything. And it's tough because I don't want to say, hey, if you don't know me, don't reach out. But it makes things difficult when there's a lot of people that somehow found your email. I mean, it's not that hard to figure it out. But if they're spamming you with music and they're like, hey, did you listen yet? Hey, it's not a good first impression either.
And if, as you said, Jimmy, if someone was to send one follow-up, because I've actually missed emails and then I get a nudge like a week later and it's like, I meant to do that and I completely forgot. I do find that useful. But if it's the next day, I'm like, come on, man, give me a bit of time to get back to you.
Definitely. So if we go back to the email side of things, if you send on SoundCloud, maybe kind of just check there if anyone's listened to the song. To say if we do listen to it, but you still don't get a response, that might just be like not super interested in the song. But we did check it out. So maybe just hold out or pull back from that idea because it did reach us. We just forgot, or things happen all the time. We're about to press reply and then someone taps us on the shoulder and then we come back and we have an urgent file we have to put out, so we switch screens. Then maybe we just didn't hit the reply and get you that response. So it's probably best to not follow up on things when you already seen that we've checked it out.
I guess that if you're like, hell yeah, then you'll remember to respond. Whereas if it's just a nice, polite, no thanks, that's gonna.
Yeah, these tips is really hard to really nail down, what the right approach is, because there's a difference between artists that we've worked with sending demos and artists that are trying to win us over with their demos. An artist that we've already released with, obviously we're going to give them a ton of attention and make sure that everything they send gets a reply. And we've built that relationship already. But it's a lot different when you're receiving hundreds of demos from the public. There just isn't the time to put into that. And our main goal as A&Rs isn't just to sign new artists. It's to continue developing the ones that we have already signed already. So it's important to realize that too, that we have got a limited amount of space on our release schedules to debut new artists. And it's kind of a rare thing that, we sign a new act, especially if we're really focusing in on those long-term relationships with artists. There becomes less and less space for new artists to join. We're always going to have some space allocated for new artist signings. We want to stay fresh. We want to innovate and make sure that, we're not missing out on any of the new styles of music. And we also like a wide variety of music. So listening to the same thing over and over again is not enjoyable for us either. Keeping that in mind, I think, is important as well. Like, you could have a really good song, but maybe at the moment we're booked up for the next 4 months and we've got other artists wanting to get in 5 months from now that we've already worked with. It just might not work. But in that case, we're going to send you an email or a response back on Label Radar saying, we like this, we want to hear more, but unfortunately going to pass on it for now. And just don't be discouraged, because you'd be surprised how many artists that we work with now on a pretty consistent basis that maybe had 5 or 10 demos turned down in the beginning before they got their first one. Your music right now isn't going to be the same as your music a year from now. It could be completely different style, it could be just completely different quality. So when we see an artist that blew up and they submitted one of their first demos to us, and then we're like, did we make a mistake by not signing it? Well, no, they weren't ready yet. It wouldn't have made any sense to put out that first demo, but they didn't submit anything else in the future. And now, it's tough to follow all these artists that are rapidly growing, improving their skills. We kind of rely on you guys to continue submitting as you get better and better so that we have an opportunity to work together. It's up to you what you want to do, really.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, guys. Is there anything else that you want to touch upon before we sign off?
Like and subscribe,
EDM
tips. Follow Monstercat. We got Uncaged, Instinct, and Silk, all very different sounding labels. there's got to be something in there for you. And yeah, thanks for having us.
I will link to all of the mentioned below. Cool. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. This has been very enjoyable for me, and I know it's going to be really useful for everyone watching as well. So there you go, guys. I really hope you found this interview as enjoyable as I did and got some really useful nuggets out of it. Now, I also recently interviewed Adrian Armandaritz, the lead A&R at Anjuna Beats. So if you want to check that out, you can watch it right here. A massive thanks again to Jon and Jimmy for taking the time to share their expertise with us. And thank you guys for watching my video. Until next time, cheers and happy producing, and I will catch you over at that next video.